That cold night in New York, the lights of a luxurious restaurant illuminated the street as if it were a palace. Imported cars stopped at the entrance, bringing clients dressed in expensive suits and glittering gowns. Behind all that ostentation, however, walked quietly a young woman in a simple uniform. Amelia, a 24-year-old black waitress. Her gaze was gentle, yet marked by the weight of the battles she had already faced in life. As she served tables, her presence seemed invisible. The clients ignored her as if she were part of the furniture. Many didn't even say thank you when she brought their food. Worse still, some looks of disdain made it clear that to them, she was nothing more than a young woman of no worth. Within the restaurant staff, the situation was no different. Colleagues laughed behind her back, mocking the simple way she dressed outside of work, the way she spoke, and even the color of her skin. Amelia pretended not to hear, but each cruel word was like a silent knife in her heart. She worked hard, yet it seemed that no one saw her. Every tray she carried, every forced smile she gave, was just another reminder that, in that place of luxury, she was nothing more than an invisible shadow. But what no one knew was that, behind that quiet young woman, there was a hidden flame, a gift capable of transforming everything. And that flame was about to be ignited. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. The evening rush had begun, and the restaurant was filled with the sound of clinking glasses, laughter, and the low hum of expensive conversations. Amelia moved swiftly between the crowded tables, balancing trays heavier than they looked. Her back ached, but she didn't let it show. She had learned long ago that weakness was a luxury she could not afford. As she leaned down to serve a glass of wine to a wealthy woman, the lady didn't even glance at her. Instead, she snapped her fingers impatiently, as though Amelia were nothing more than a servant from another era. "Be careful not to spill it," the woman said coldly, her eyes fixed on her diamond bracelet instead of the human being in front of her. A group of young businessmen at the next table smirked as Amelia walked by. "Look at her uniform," one whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "I bet she doesn't even make in a month what we spent tonight on this dinner." The others laughed, their voices cutting through her like sharp knives. She lowered her eyes, pretending not to notice. Pretending was the only way to survive. In the kitchen, things were no better. One of her co-workers, a waitress named Karen, rolled her eyes. "Move faster, Amelia. You're too slow. No wonder nobody tips you," she sneered. The others chuckled, and Amelia swallowed her pride, focusing on her work. But humiliation was not always in words. Sometimes, it was in silence. The way people looked right through her, as if she didn't exist. As if her life, her struggles, her dreams, meant nothing. Still, deep inside, Amelia whispered a prayer. "God, give me strength. Don't let me give up. One day they'll see who I really am." She carried another tray out to the dining room, unaware that fate was quietly arranging the moment when the world would finally be forced to notice her. The city never slept, but Amelia's apartment was always silent at night. After finishing her late shift, she would return home exhausted, her hands sore from carrying trays and her feet burning from hours of standing. The tiny one-bedroom she rented was far from the glamour of the restaurant. Peeling paint on the walls, a flickering light bulb in the hallway, and a window that barely shut against the cold. But to Amelia, it was more than four walls. It was her safe haven. She kicked off her worn shoes, poured herself a glass of water, and let out a long breath. For most people, the day would have ended there. But for Amelia, the night was when her soul came alive. She pulled out an old second-hand microphone connected to a cheap speaker. On the small table sat a notebook filled with handwritten lyrics, verses scribbled between shifts, and pages stained with coffee and tears. Amelia stood in front of the mirror, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice filled the tiny apartment, powerful yet tender, carrying emotions deeper than words could ever express. In those moments, she was no longer the invisible waitress mocked by strangers. She was a woman with a gift, a voice that could heal, inspire, and shake hearts to their core. Her neighbors sometimes paused in the hallway just to listen, One even whispered once, "That girl has the voice of an angel." But Amelia laughed it off. To her, it was just a dream, a fragile one she dared not speak aloud. Singing was the promise she once made to her late mother, who had always told her, "Never hide who you are, Amelia. God gave you a gift. One day, the world will hear it." But every time she looked at her reflection, she hesitated. Could someone like her, a poor black waitress, really stand on a stage where only the powerful and privileged were allowed? For now, her dream remained hidden, guarded in the silence of her apartment, waiting for the right moment to break free. And that moment was closer than she could imagine. The restaurant had never been so alive. Gold-trimmed curtains were drawn open, crystal chandeliers sparkled from above, and the scent of expensive champagne filled the air. Tonight was not just any evening. It was the annual gala, an event that attracted the city's most powerful figures. Wealthy businessmen, politicians, and celebrities who rarely mingled with ordinary people. The staff was under enormous pressure. Every detail had to be perfect. The manager barked orders. "Keep those glasses filled, smile wider, and for heaven's sake stay out of the guests' way. They're not here to see you." Amelia tightened her apron, keeping her head low. She had worked dozens of nights here, but nothing compared to the spectacle unfolding now. Luxury cars pulled up one after another, spilling out women in glittering gowns and men in perfectly tailored suits. Flashing cameras from the press lit up the entrance like fireworks. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Live musicians played soft jazz, while servers hurried back and forth balancing trays of lobster, caviar, and champagne. The wealthy laughed loudly, as though the world outside their walls did not exist. Amelia moved quietly among them, her steps practiced and precise. To the guests, she was invisible, just another uniform in a sea of staff. But she noticed everything. The way they spoke, the arrogance in their tone, the dismissive waves of their hands. One of the businessmen, a man with slicked-back gray hair and a cigar in hand, leaned toward his friend and chuckled. "Can you imagine working in a place like this, serving drinks to people who actually matter? What a waste of a life." The words stung, but Amelia forced herself to keep moving. She placed another glass on a table, smiled politely, and walked away. At the center of the ballroom stood a grand stage draped in velvet. Everyone was waiting for the highlight of the night. A famous singer was scheduled to perform. The anticipation was palpable, and conversations buzzed with excitement. But Amelia's eyes lingered on that stage longer than they should have. Her heart ached with a silent wish. If only I could stand there just once. If only they knew what I was capable of. She shook the thought away quickly. That world was not hers. Or so she believed. What Amelia didn't know was that tonight, in this hall filled with the city's elite, destiny was preparing to shatter the walls between the powerful and the invisible. And it would all begin with one cruel laugh that would change everything. The ballroom was overflowing with laughter, glitter, and arrogance. Waiters rushed like shadows, and Amelia moved among them, steady and silent. But no matter how carefully she carried the trays, how gently she smiled, someone always found a way to put her down. As she approached a table filled with wealthy businessmen, one of them, a man named Richard Hale, smirked as he watched her. His voice was loud, intentionally so, ensuring everyone around could hear. "Well, look at this," he sneered, pointing directly at Amelia. "The restaurant must be desperate if they're letting anyone serve here now." The table erupted in laughter. Amelia froze for a split second, her hand gripping the tray tighter. She forced her face into neutrality, though inside her heart was pounding with shame. She placed the drinks carefully, whispering a soft, "Here you go, sir." But Richard wasn't finished. "Tell me," he said mockingly, "do they pay you enough to buy real clothes? Or do you just wear that uniform all the time?" His friends laughed harder, and even a couple at a nearby table glanced over, smirking at the cruel spectacle. A heat rose in Amelia's chest, not anger but humiliation. Her throat tightened, her eyes burned, yet she refused to let a tear fall. Instead, she lowered her gaze, bowed slightly, and turned to walk away. But Richard leaned back in his chair and called after her. "Don't worry, sweetheart. People like you don't need dignity. Just keep the glasses full." The cruelty sliced through the air. Some guests shook their heads in disapproval, but none spoke up. The laughter lingered, echoing louder than the music. Amelia stepped into the kitchen, finally away from the mocking eyes. She set the tray down, hands trembling. The other servers barely noticed her struggle. Some even chuckled, whispering about how embarrassing it must have been. She pressed her back against the wall, breathing heavily. In that moment, she wanted to disappear. To run out of the restaurant, never come back, and never have to face those eyes again. But then a memory rose, her mother's gentle voice, firm and full of faith. "Never let their laughter define you. God gave you a gift, Amelia. And one day, the world will see it." Amelia closed her eyes. The humiliation was unbearable, but she refused to let it break her spirit. What she didn't know was that this cruel joke was the spark destiny needed to set her fire ablaze. The kitchen door swung shut behind her, blocking out the echo of cruel laughter from the dining hall. But the words still clung to her like poison, replaying in her mind with every heartbeat. Amelia leaned against the cold wall, gripping the fabric of her apron so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. She had faced countless insults before, but tonight something inside her cracked. Her eyes welled up, and though she tried to fight it, a tear slid down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand, glancing around to make sure no one had seen. Showing pain here was dangerous. It only gave the others more fuel to mock her. She whispered to herself, barely audible, Why do they hate me so much? What did I ever do to them?" The kitchen bustled around her. Dishes clattered, cooks shouted, and servers rushed past, but none paid her any attention. In their eyes, Amelia was just another worker, replaceable, forgettable, invisible. She slipped into the storage room, seeking a moment alone. There, away from the chaos, she finally let her tears fall freely. The weight of humiliation pressed down on her shoulders, threatening to crush the fragile hope she carried. For a moment, the temptation was strong. To give up, to quit this job, to abandon the dream she had carried since childhood. After all, what chance did she have in a world that had already decided her worth before she opened her mouth? But then, her gaze fell on the small necklace hanging around her neck, a simple silver pendant her mother had given her years ago. She clutched it tightly, hearing her mother's voice echo in her memory. "Amelia, promise me. Promise you'll never stop singing. Even when the world tries to silence you, let your voice rise. Because your voice is your gift. And God does not give gifts for nothing." Her tears slowed, her breathing steadied. Though the pain was still raw, a spark of determination flickered in her chest. Amelia wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and whispered, "I won't let them break me. Not tonight, not ever." What she didn't realize was that destiny was already setting the stage. A twist of fate was about to place her in a moment where the whole world would have no choice but to listen. Back in the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd was buzzing with anticipation. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the evening's main entertainment was about to begin. Guests leaned forward in their seats, glasses of champagne raised, ready to be dazzled. The velvet curtain on the grand stage swayed gently as the master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with theatrical flair, "please welcome tonight's star performer, the one and only Daniel Cross." Applause thundered across the hall. Daniel Cross was a well-known singer, adored by the city's elite. His presence was one of the biggest draws of the gala, but minutes passed. The curtain stayed closed. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The applause faded into whispers of confusion. Backstage, chaos erupted. A stagehand rushed to the manager, whispering frantically, "Sir, we have a problem. Daniel's car broke down on the way here. He's stuck in traffic, maybe an hour away." The manager paled. "An hour? We can't keep them waiting that long." His eyes darted around the room, panic growing. "The mayor is here, celebrities are here. If this event fails, it's my head." The master of ceremonies returned to the microphone, forcing a nervous smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain patient. Mr. Cross will be joining us shortly." But the audience was restless. Glasses clinked, conversations turned impatient, and some guests rolled their eyes. The energy in the room was slipping away. In the corner of the room, Amelia stood with a tray in her hands, watching quietly. She had no idea why the delay was happening, but she could sense the tension building like a storm. The manager stormed into the kitchen, frustrated and desperate. "Does anyone here know how to sing? Anything? We just need to stall until Daniel arrives." The staff laughed nervously, shaking their heads. Some joked about it, others shrugged, and no one dared to volunteer. Amelia froze. Her heart pounded. This was insane. Impossible. She couldn't just step out there. She was a waitress, not a performer. But inside her chest, that hidden dream stirred violently, whispering, "This is your moment." Karen, her co-worker who often mocked her, smirked. "Well, maybe we should let Amelia try," she said sarcastically. "She probably sings in her shower all day." Laughter erupted from the staff, but the manager's desperate eyes turned to Amelia. "You?" he said sharply. "Do you sing?" Amelia hesitated. Her throat tightened. 100 fears crashed into her mind all at once: the laughter, the humiliation, the risk of failing in front of the most powerful people in the city. But then, she felt the weight of her mother's necklace against her chest. The promise, the gift, the calling. She took a trembling breath and whispered, barely audible, "Yes." The manager blinked. "Then get ready. You're on." Amelia's blood ran cold. The tray nearly slipped from her hands. She wanted to scream that it was a mistake, that she couldn't possibly do this. But somewhere deeper than fear, a quiet fire began to burn. For the first time, the invisible waitress was about to step into the light. The murmur of the restless crowd echoed through the golden hall. Crystal glasses clinked, heels tapped impatiently against the marble floor. Everyone was waiting, annoyed that their star singer hadn't arrived. And then, the spotlight shifted. The velvet curtain pulled back slightly, revealing not Daniel Cross, the famous performer they expected, but a young waitress in a plain black uniform. Gasps spread like wildfire. Murmurs turned sharp. What is she doing here? Is this some kind of joke? Why would they let her on stage? Amelia's knees trembled as she stepped into the light. The tray was gone, replaced by a microphone that felt heavier than anything she had ever held. Her heart pounded so loudly it nearly drowned out the noise of the crowd. She could see them, the very faces that had mocked her minutes ago. Richard Hale smirked arrogantly, whispering something to the man beside him that sent both into cruel laughter. Karen, her co-worker, stood in the back with folded arms, rolling her eyes, clearly expecting her to fail. Amelia swallowed hard. For a moment she considered running. Her hand shook so badly the microphone almost slipped. But then, her fingers brushed the silver pendant at her neck, her mother's necklace. And in that instant, she remembered. Her mother's words. Her late-night rehearsals in her tiny apartment. The tears, the prayers, the dream she had kept hidden all her life. This was not humiliation. This was her chance. The pianist, confused but ready to follow orders, looked at her. "What key?" he asked quietly. Amelia took a deep breath. Her voice was soft but steady. C minor. The first notes filled the room. A hush fell. The whispers stopped. All eyes locked on the girl who was never meant to be noticed. Then she opened her mouth. The first note that escaped was raw, powerful, and breathtaking. It soared across the hall like lightning, rich with pain and beauty, trembling with truth. Her voice was not polished like a professional's, but it carried something far greater: soul. Every lyric, every note told a story of struggle, of humiliation, of silent prayers whispered in the dark. She was no longer the invisible waitress. She was a woman whose voice demanded to be heard. The audience froze. Forks paused mid-air. Champagne glasses remained untouched. Even Richard Hale's smirk disappeared, replaced by disbelief. Amelia sang as if her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. When she hit the final high note, her voice rang through the chandeliers, echoing against the golden walls until the room fell into absolute silence. And in that silence, the impossible had happened. The invisible girl had made herself unforgettable. The final note still hung in the air, trembling like a prayer reaching heaven. Then, silence. Absolute, deafening silence. For the first time all night, the powerful, the wealthy, the arrogant, every single one of them, had nothing to say. Amelia stood there, chest heaving, hands shaking, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she had just done. The microphone trembled in her grip, but her voice no longer did. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she had gone too far, if she had made a fool of herself. Then she looked out at the crowd. Dozens of faces stared back at her in shock. Some had mouths slightly open as if they had forgotten how to breathe. Others leaned forward, eyes glistening, unable to hide the emotion her voice had stirred within them. Even Richard Hale, the man who had humiliated her, sat frozen. His smug grin was gone, replaced by something he had never expected to feel toward her. Respect. Or perhaps fear that the woman he mocked had just stolen the spotlight from everyone in the room. The silence stretched on, heavy and electric. Amelia could hear her own heartbeat, the faint buzz of the microphone, the sound of her breath. She lowered her gaze, ready to step off the stage, when suddenly, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow, deliberate, powerful. The sound echoed across the ballroom. All eyes turned to see an elderly woman in an emerald gown, her face softened with tears. She clapped again, louder. Then another guest joined her. Then another. And then the dam broke. The silence erupted into thunderous applause. People rose from their seats, clapping, cheering, whistling. Some wiped their eyes, others shouted her name, though they had only just learned it. The sound shook the very chandeliers above, drowning out everything except the overwhelming truth. Amelia had conquered them. She stood frozen, overwhelmed. Her dream, once hidden in the walls of her tiny apartment, was now alive in the hearts of everyone in that golden hall. No longer invisible, no longer mocked. For the first time, Amelia was seen. But the night was not over. The applause was only the beginning of the justice destiny had prepared for her. The thunder of applause shook the golden hall, echoing against the marble walls. Amelia stood on stage, trembling, her eyes wide in disbelief. Only minutes ago, she had been a shadow carrying trays, a target of cruel laughter. Now she was the center of a storm she had created with nothing but her voice. The master of ceremonies hurried back to the stage, his face flushed with excitement. He grabbed the microphone and gestured to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed something extraordinary tonight. What is your name, miss?" Amelia hesitated, her voice almost a whisper. "Amelia." The audience erupted again. "Amelia. Amelia." Her name spread through the hall like fire, shouted by those who had once looked at her with disdain. Then, something even more unexpected happened. A man in a tailored suit stepped forward, one of the event's sponsors, a music producer known for discovering talent. His eyes were fixed on her, not with pity, but with awe. "That voice," he said firmly into the microphone, "deserves to be heard by the world. Amelia, have you ever considered recording professionally?" Gasps swept the room. Cameras from the press zoomed in, capturing the moment. Amelia's knees nearly buckled. She had dreamed of this her entire life, but never believed it possible. Before she could even answer, Richard Hale, the same man who had mocked her mercilessly, stood awkwardly from his seat. His face burned red as he tried to save face. I always knew she had potential," he stammered, his arrogance now replaced with nervousness. The crowd booed him. For the first time, Richard tasted the bitter flavor of public shame. The laughter he had once used as a weapon was now turned against him. Amelia, her voice steady and filled with dignity, lifted the microphone once more. I don't sing for fame. I sing because it's who I am. I sing because my mother once told me, God does not give gifts for nothing. Tonight you saw me because I refused to stay invisible. The room fell silent again, but this time, in reverence. Tears streamed down Amelia's face as she bowed her head. In that moment, she wasn't just a waitress, or even a singer. She was a symbol of resilience, of justice, of hope, for everyone who had ever been silenced, humiliated, or underestimated. The applause that followed was not just for her song, it was for her courage. And as Amelia stepped off the stage, her life changed forever. In a world that often mocks the humble and silences the poor, Amelia proved that no amount of cruelty can bury a God-given gift. She was invisible until the moment she chose to rise. And when she did, the world had no choice but to see her. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been silenced by laughter? Share your story in the comments. And remember, justice may delay, but it never fails. Never lose hope, because the light inside you can change everything.